Today's guest on the winning teams is a remarkable young lady. She is Hannah Williams. She is an extraordinarily high achiever, and I will explain that a little bit more. And you can listen to her story at the very beginning of the podcast, but it really is worth it. But believe you me, she is quite an extraordinary high achiever at a very young age. But the business that she has is all about helping organizations to really engage with, embrace, attract, and retain Gen Zers. And I mean, as a Gen Z herself, she's very well qualified to do that. But she's highly articulate about the challenges that organizations have with Gen Zers and the challenges that Gen Zers have in terms of when they look at organizations. So we do talk about that. We talk about the concept of radical empathy, and she's got a great take on that I think is really worth listening to. And we also talk about the stumbling blocks for many Gen Zers in terms of going into the workplace and into organizations that are available to them. And of course, the challenge that organizations have, because very many of the Gen Zers coming in are going to be managed by either Gen X's or millennials. And how do they get the best out of the Gen Zer, and how does the Gen Zer get the best out of the organization? So it's a fascinating topic. Hannah is a highly articulate lady, and I must say I've been very impressed with her. Anytime I've had a conversation with her clarity and the way she can articulate her point of view, and a very, very definite and very, very clear point of view is one to be admired. So I really encourage you to listen to it. If you're enjoying the podcast, please give us a rating on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you actually listen to your podcast, because that's how we get to a wider audience. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy Hannah Williams. Hannah, thank you so much indeed for joining us today on the winning teams. We're delighted to have you here.
I'm excited, John. I appreciate you having me from the other side of the globe here.
Absolutely. Well, you're quite the high achiever. You graduated with a degree in international business at the age of 18, right? Which I find fascinating. You're now, and I think I'm not sharing anything that you haven't said publicly. You're 23 years old now.
I just turned 24, but
just 24. Gosh, how the years go by. But you at the age you consult with startups, you work with Fortune 500 companies to help leverage Gen Z talent as a competitive advantage. You're also the author of a book, A Leader's Guide to Unlocking Gen Z. How did all that happen so fast, and how did you get there? And I don't mean this to sound in any way patronizing, more in admiration of you, but how did you actually manage to do all of that in a few short years?
Such a good question, John. Short answer is my parents, when I was 12, an interesting experience happened to me that kind of led me down this path of where I am now. And it actually started in the back of a blue pickup truck. So my dad was an entrepreneur and has been for as long as I can remember. But when I was 12, I was sitting in the back of his blue pickup truck. It was a Friday afternoon. I was a homeschooled student growing up, the oldest of 7 kids. And so my dad, being the real estate entrepreneur that he was and is, decided he was going to start taking his kids to work with him, 1 or 2 days out of the week. So I'm sitting in the back of his blue pickup truck. I am bouncing down the highway, trying to get my homework done. Like, Dad, come on, can't you drive a little smoother? Well, out of the blue, I have my books open in my lap. I'm trying to get math homework done. He hands me his cell phone and he says, "Hey, Hannah, this phone's ringing. There's a guy at the end of the line who wants to sell his house and you're going to close the deal." And as you can imagine, John, I am just completely flabbergasted, just out of my mind. Like, Dad, I was coming, to work with you to go collect some rents and, meet your tenants and whatever. I did not expect to be getting probably the one business development call that would come in that entire week. But he trusted me. So I took this phone. I'm 12 years old and I And I fumbled through this call. And sure enough, with his help, we ended up closing this real estate deal that week. And my parents still own this duplex. So just kind of seeing this all come full circle, here I am at 24 now, so 12 years later, and I can still go drive by this kind of introduction to my world of entrepreneurship that I was born into, but didn't really understand until my dad decided, hey, kid, you're going to get thrust into this at a really early age. So that was the catalyst, like the point in my life I remember as really spurring my direction. And it's led to just a journey of curiosity and trying to figure out through my teenage years, what did I want to do? What was I passionate about? And it ultimately, through a lot of other things that I could go into, but it's a long story, have landed me here working with amazing companies and leaders, helping them prepare to recruit and retain my generation.
It's a great story, and I think it's a wonderful story. And I think it's interesting that the word that you used in there was that your dad trusted you, right? And I think that that's such an important word, because where there is trust, it just opens the floodgates for people to flourish and to grow. And of course, the opposite is also true. When there is a lack of trust, it does quite the opposite. But one of the things I love that story, and I remember the first time you told it to me, it just stuck with me, and that's why I wanted everyone to hear that. But one of the things that you talk about is what you refer to as radical empathy, right? Can you explain to everybody what do you actually mean by radical empathy?
Yes. So we are growing up in a time, by we, I mean me, my peers, my 6 younger siblings, my generation, where I'm growing up in, especially in America, across the world, but in America, we really see this changing for my generation. I'm growing up in a world where the melting pot is continuing to melt even more, where there are so many cultures, so many communities trying to come together and oftentimes failing at it, right? I mean, we see what's going on in the world from every angle, whether it's in business or in politics or in economics. Literally every sphere of the world is continuing to grow increasingly divided. And I'm looking at this from my perspective, and this is my personal opinion, John, not even looking at what the rest of my generation thinks. But when I say radical empathy, what I'm talking about is, we often talk about just the word empathy, right? Stepping into someone else's shoes or being able to see from their perspective. When I say radical empathy, what I'm talking about is we need to not have a fear of disagreeing. We need to step into empathy with someone. For example, I have many friends who are first-generation immigrants from Honduras, Mexico, El Salvador, and here in America, and I'm sure this is the case in your part of the world too, in Ireland, in the UK, in other places where we're seeing these cultures come in and just clash, and each of those cultures is bringing different moral foundations, different religious backgrounds. And so as someone from Gen Z, which a lot of people will often call the most, it's the generation leading this idea of acceptance, which I'm not completely on board with myself. I would rather take this approach of radical empathy, which is, I don't have to agree with you in order to empathize with you. So not only am I willing to step into your shoes, I'm also willing to say, it's okay to disagree. That's radical, but I can still empathize and understand your perspective, which may begin from a different worldview than my own. And that's what I would like to see more at work, and what I see happening in my generation on communities and platforms like The Conversationalist, which is the first Gen Z talk show. My friend Sophie Barron, she has launched this incredible platform for Gen Zers to come in and have radical empathy and say, we can disagree about whatever the topic is, whether it's something local, like, or I say local, I guess it's national for me, what's happening in America right now with the mass shootings. And you can also look at global issues like climate change or economics. And we get on this platform and we fearlessly disagree, but still have empathy.
And I think that's hugely important, because I think that there is a growing tendency to polarization, in the sense of that, it's everything is it's either black or white, and and that doesn't leave a lot of room for conversation. And at the end of the day, I think that what we actually need is the platform to have the conversations that we need to have, which does mean that we're not always going to agree, but we can empathize with each other, but we can actually have quite different opinions. I think it's a great point, and I really commend you for actually articulating it in that way.
I want
One
to
of
add one more thing, John, because
Sure.
I think this is interesting. I and I don't get to talk about this often, honestly, on shows, because it's something that's very an interesting perspective, I guess, that you don't hear a lot from others. And it's this idea that we use the word, when there's polarization, we use the word tolerance, right? We all need to be more tolerant of each other and more accepting. But inherently, the word tolerance means you have to disagree first and then make a conscious choice to tolerate that idea or that person or that belief, right? And so it's very interesting to me when we as a globe, as a world, are using tolerance as an idea. It's kind of started to connote this idea of acceptance, when really that's not what the word tolerant means. So in going along with radical empathy, it's how do we as a community, as a world, as companies, as leaders, be tolerant and say, I choose to state the fact that I do disagree with you, but let's have a conversation. I respect your beliefs and your opinions.
I think that's brilliant. I really like what you're saying there, because I also think, I mean, tolerance is not a word that I'm particularly fond of, because I think it does have a slightly patronizing kind of flavor to it. And I think it is, I think what you're saying there is much healthier, that we just can have a debate, we can have a conversation, and we can disagree. But I understand you, but I'm not necessarily agreeing with it. Can I go on to say something else that you said that I found very, very interesting, is that you believe, sorry, I hope I'm quoting you correctly, you believe that Gen Zers are going to encounter stumbling blocks based on how they were raised, to the socioeconomic and political factors that shape them, and the influence of technology. Why do you see that as stumbling blocks, and what are the stumbling blocks you're referring to?
This very well connects with something I was just talking about. So let me just give you an example, John. So in my podcast that I think you'll get to come on soon, which is exciting. I'm glad to happy we get to expand this conversation. But in my podcast, I am as a native digital. So I'm 24, and I call that, I use the terms Gen Z and native digital synonymously. So you've got myself as a native digital, and I bring on guests who are native analog, basically anyone who was born in an era that was not digital first. So
Yeah.
usually that's around
like me, like
like
me,
you, like you, like my parents, like my grandparents, and like the majority of business owners and leaders. And we have a conversation on the show with every single one of my guests about the different ways that a native digital thinks, works, and plays versus what someone who's coming from a native analog perspective, how they would do the same things. And it was interesting, on one of my recent conversations, we were talking about the economy and talking about, just we got down to the really tactical level, and we were just discussing, how does someone who is natively analog, who is very familiar with technology, how do they pay bills? We just got very, very, very tactical here, just on like a personal level. And my guest said, well, used to, I would write checks, or I would, that's just how I did my accounting, my personal bookkeeping. And then as technology grew, I started paying online. So I'd get my bill maybe in the mail or an email, and then I would physically go online and pay this bill. And hear me out, John. I know this is a long way around answering your question, but it'll illustrate a point here. So basically, he was saying, what I heard him saying was, he was taking a native analog way of doing something, which would be writing a check, and immigrating it into the digital world, right? So he was taking a native analog way of doing something, bringing in the use of technology, and then paying his bill that way. It accomplished the goal he needed to. Well, then he asked me, what do I do? And my response is, I've never really touched money. I mean, yes, I've, used cash or whatever when I was younger, and sometimes still today, but I do not understand as a Gen Zer, and God help our, this Gen Zer is younger than me, but our generation does not understand what it was like to have those analog things. When we think of money, we think of a string of numbers. And so if you'd ask me, how do I pay my bills? Well, the way I would is I get an app like Truebill, and it tells me, here's your weekly spending report of what you did last month. You probably shouldn't go out to dinner tonight because that would put you over budget in this area. The app literally tells me how to spend my money. And so just this one contrast of the native digital versus the native analog perspectives is leading to a ton of stumbling blocks and barriers when you take those two different approaches from the two categories of human and their approaches to life, and then you put that in the workforce. Because if you take the native digital approach, which is I need AI and tech to tell me how to live my life effectively as a human adult person, and then you have the native analog perspective, which is I manage my money, right? Maybe I'm making assumptions here, John, but I would probably say, and my parents and my grandparents would tell me, and many of the leaders I work with, they know exactly how much is, in their bank account. They know how they're paying their bills that month, whatever. And again, this is a simplified example, but just taking those two approaches, what happens when that Gen Zer and that Gen Xer or that Boomer are trying to work together on a team, and they have completely different ideas of what leadership should look like, of what feedback should look like, of what learning and training should look like, because they come from vastly different worlds.
Yeah. So I want to come back to that, but let me just kind of jump in, because just what you touched on there. So you're talking about the Gen Z are coming into the workforce. And I know this is a generalization, and I'm asking a generalized question, but generally speaking, what are the Gen Zers looking for when they're going into an organization? I appreciate that's a generalized question, but just because I want to come back to this issue that you just mentioned there, which is important, about you've got either colleagues or managers managing the Gen Zers. So first question, in general, what are the Gen Zers looking for when they're coming into an organization?
Big question that we could spend hours on this topic, John, but I'll try to boil this down into a couple of just key things to be thinking about. So I talk about this in my book. There's a whole section devoted to this topic, and it's called the Gen Z Trinity. So if you think about an organization, not from the tactical standpoint, a lot of CHROs or senior managers or even business owners will come to me and they'll say, what are the tips and tricks and little things I need to be doing to make my company more attractive to Gen Z? And I'll say, you're asking the wrong question, right? You're not asking what about our organizational structure or our culture is turning away potential Gen Z candidates. You're asking, what swag do I need to design to make my company look better? So to answer your question in hopefully a broad way that will help everyone think about their organization, the Gen Z Trinity is the three things that Gen Z really sees straight through. I call Gen Z the no bullshit generation, because we can literally see through anything that is fake. And the Gen Z Trinity, the three components are diversity, and we'll get back to what diversity actually means, because it's not what first pops into your head. The second is authenticity. And the third is ethics/transparency.
Right.
So what I mean by those briefly is Gen Z is looking for an organization that is going to give them no shit. They're going to understand from the connections between your online brand, which is just as important as your physical location, which is also just as important as your interactions or the interactions a Gen Zer would have with your leaders, potential managers, and colleagues. You need to have continuity between the face you put up online and the face you're putting up physically in person or at a physical location. So that authenticity throughout your entire organization is so crucial. When Gen Z sees a leader or even a company statement come out that is inconsistent with their values or looks like they're simply responding to a political movement just because they have to, it looks just so inauthentic to Gen Z, and it's not a company we're going to be excited about working for. So I guess the advice that I would give if you're analyzing yourself through the three lenses is my organization, number one, fully representative of the diversity of the population I'm serving, in terms of, are you thinking about not just skin color diversity, but also your economic diversity? There's only a few organizations I know of hiring formerly incarcerated people. Are you thinking about the disabled workforce? Are you giving equal opportunity, and do you really know what your values are in those areas?
Yeah.
And then secondly, are you authentic? Are you actually showing up in all the different worlds, your digital world, your physical world? Are you showing up the same way? And is your leadership consistently making statements that are not followed up on, or that are inconsistent, or that are against something you've said in the past? We're going to see straight through it. And then thirdly, with ethics, are you a company that is forward thinking and looking at the global good as a whole? Are you a company whose values, if you state your values, are you following that up with action, with support, with whatever that cause is that you support? So as one example, one of my clients is owned by a vet, and so his organization actively supports the several programs here in the US that help support and feed and house veterans. It would be an inconsistency in his brand if he were to go out and support, I don't know, climate change, for example, because that wasn't in alignment with his values as an organization. So when you kind of pair those three together, the diversity, authenticity, and ethics, then you have a lens through which you can both talk about and portray to Gen Z, this is the type of company you're going to be interested in working for, because we do what we say we're going to do.
Yeah. So going back to the question we were before we got that we were talking about before I asked you that question, coming back to the managers of the Gen Zers who are likely to be Gen X or millennials, right? Who come with quite a different framework and point of reference to their world. How do they need to manage the Gen Zers to ensure that they are getting the best out of the Gen Zers, both for the Gen Zers and for the organization?
Again, this is a very, very large question. So I'll give two tactics here. So the first thing that I suggest literally any leader or organization do is, and I actually developed a quiz to help with this, you need to take a self-assessment of how well are you managing Gen Z already, and where might be the blind spots that you're missing. And I actually, John, I know we talked about this link beforehand, but I actually just launched this quiz for leaders, for managers to take to assess how relevant to Native Digitals is my company. So it's called the Native Digital Relevance Score, and it takes like 5 minutes to go through, but it's at my website. So it's hannahgwilliams.com/winning teams for this show.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, you can, like, literally anybody can go on there and take that quiz and you'll actually get a grade, John. It's like going back to school. you'll get a grade. It'll tell you, like, between 1 and 100, you just scored a 62.5. That means you got an F. And then it'll give you recommendations, or it might say you get an A and you're doing really, really well. But beyond that, like, once you assess where you are as a leader, the second thing is, I would just say, as a manager, number one, Gen Z is a very high-tech generation, like we would all assume, but we're also high touch. So when if you're managing Gen Z or a Gen Z team, the first thing you need to remember is we are natively digital. And let me explain a little bit of what this means, because I know I've given a couple examples of what it looks like, but when I say natively digital, what I mean is we are the first generation that has grown up integrated with machines, meaning we're not just immigrating into the use of technology or digital worlds such as video gaming, apps, social media, etc. We're actually born into that. Mm-hmm. So we live more. If you look at the average Gen Zer screen time, it's over 6 hours per day, just on a cell phone. That does not include video games or the different worlds that we live in. That's just a cell phone. So, take out sleep, take 24 hours in a day, you take out, let's say on average, 8-9 hours of sleep. So we're down to, 15-16 hours of awake time a day. Let's say you take out school for the average Gen Zer, say that's another 7 hours of the day. Then you add 6 hours of screen time. You've got what, 1 or 2 hours left of the day? That is literally how much time Gen Z is spending in these digital worlds. And so when I say natively digital, what I mean is we have a new category of human that for the first time is spending more time in the digital world than in the analog world. And by 2025, every manager is going to see, on average, 27% of their employees will be this native digital human. Yeah. So I know I didn't answer your question directly, but like just to say.
No, but it's a very interesting perspective. I mean, mm-hmm. I'm not going to open the debate about whether that spending that amount of time on your phone screen is actually a positive or a negative. That could be a completely different podcast on its own. But that is the fact, and that is what you're looking for. Hannah, it's a fascinating subject, and your expertise is amazing, and your ability to articulate that is just fantastic. And I'd love to come back, because I think this is a really important topic, and I do think that you've really got some great points and some great in guidelines for people to actually embrace, to really help them, because it is a very real issue. And there's no doubt about it, it's a very real issue. So I think that, what you're talking about is fantastic, and I applaud you for that. Before we wrap up and kind of where you can tell people where to get in touch with you, 2 questions I ask everybody. One is a book other than your own that you have read that had an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. I absolutely have you read this book?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I'm a big fan of their work. I really am a big fan of their work.
I actually had the opportunity to meet them a few years ago, and it was phenomenal. But Decisive, the impact it's had on me is it's just reframed how I make decisions. It has helped expand my peripheral vision to say, you know what, maybe my dogmatic black and white way of thinking, which maybe you can tell from just this conversation, John, but I tend to be very passionate about a direction when I get excited about it. And just reading that book expanded my horizons in so many ways. And, one of the tactics, to be brief here, but one of the tactics is, if you're having a hard time making a decision, ask, what would your best friend, how would your best friend advise you to make this decision if you were your best friend?
Yeah.
So looking from a third party's perspective, and it can get you out of your head in so many ways. So that was amazing.
Yeah, great book. I love I love their content. I love what they write. Second question is daily rituals, if you have them, and are you happy to share them, and what impact they have on you.
One of my favorite daily rituals. I have several that several that I've tried to build habits around. Some of them work, some of them fail. But one of them that I love is I have one of those, like the dry erase markers for my mirror. So you can get them where you can write on your mirror and your bathroom and then erase them. And one of the things I love to do is I'll kind of alternate between days. Sometimes I'll write what I'm grateful for. Sometimes in the morning, I'll write something that I am excited about. And sometimes if I'm having a rough day at the end of the day, I'll just write down, what's the one thing I did today that helped someone else? And just walk through helping myself think about, life is about so much more than just accomplishing. And it's so much more than just about progress. Sometimes the one bright moment in a day is the day I got to help someone, even with something small. And I consider that a success.
That's great. I love that. Love that. And I think gratitude is so powerful and so important. Hannah, this has been super. I loved it. I love doing the conversation with you. I really enjoy the topic. I think it's such an important topic that we need to really get our heads around, and people like me at the age that I'm at, I really need to understand it more, and as you say, step into the shoes of that generation. Before we wrap up, where can people get in touch with you? We'll put it all. Thank you for that link, by the way, and we'll put that in the show notes so people can go on and get the test. I'm going to go and do that myself, but I really encourage people to do that, because I know on your site there's also a lot of really good content. But where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if you go to that link, there's all my information. There is a fun way to just meet me, and in a group setting. I have a masterclass I do every other Thursday. And if you just go to hannahgwilliams.com/get that shit, that's literally the link, get that shit. Then you can sign up for the masterclass. And I pop in there. We talk about attracting and recruiting Gen Z and get tactical with it. And it is just a blast with the community that attends and the people who are there. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Just go to my website. You can link to LinkedIn and all that jazz.
Great. Okay, that is super. By the way, before we wrap up, your 6 younger brothers and sisters, are they following your line in the entrepreneurial side of the world?
We have yet to see. My youngest sister is 7, so she's still in the phase of, Mommy, I just got a puppy and I'm so excited. That jazz. The next 2 down, my third sister, she just graduated and she is going to law school. So that's her path. It looks a little bit different. And then my middle sister does have some of that entrepreneurial skill in her. She may even be starting an Airbnb. So we will see where they all head, but they're all very, very different people. That is for sure.
Well, that's what diversity, you mentioned that earlier on. That's what that's all about too. Hannah, thank you so much indeed for being a guest today. It's been a real joy to have you. Thank you for coming along, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks, John. It's been a delight to be here.